It was 2 years ago this week that the Me Too movement 2.0 began in earnest, opening the floodgates for sexual misconduct allegations that have brought down some of the most powerful men in the country. Men like Bill O'Reilly, Kevin Spacey, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, to name just a few. But of course, it all started with one man, Harvey Weinstein, in an article in the New York Times detailing decades of sexual harassment and assault allegations, retaliation for speaking out, and secret hush money settlements. Additional accusations would later pour in. The company Weinstein founded would drop him, and ultimately he'd be charged with rape in a criminal case that's set to go to trial in Manhattan next year. But even now, we're learning more about how far Weinstein went. And in a New York Times op-ed over the weekend, one of his former assistants, Rowena Chiu, accused him of trying to rape her more than 20 years ago. She details the attack, a non-disclosure agreement, and the power dynamics that allowed it all to happen. Chiu's story is one of many previously undisclosed, but recently reported by the same investigative twosome behind the original story in the Times, which they lay out in the new thriller, even though you know the ending. It's called She Said, Breaking the Sexual Harassment Story, that helped ignite a movement. The Pulitzer Prize-winning authors join me now. Jodi Kantor also helped break the Me Too allegations against comedian Louis C.K. It's a pleasure to meet you, Jodi. And Megan Twohey reported on a series of sexual assault allegations against Donald Trump during the 2016 election. Megan, same to you. Thanks both for being here. Congratulations. It's unbelievable. Are there common threads, Jodi, among those who escape a reckoning despite being credibly accused, the Trumps, the Kavanaughs, the Clintons, and on the other hand, those who don't, the O'Reillys, the Lauers, the Weinsteins? Are there common threads?
So we wrote this book to really take you behind the scenes of these events that have come to mean so much to so many people. And we write about mainly the accusations against Donald Trump, Harvey Weinstein, and Brett Kavanaugh. And two of those are political, and that is a big difference. What we have found again and again in the political realm is that these stories turn into almost holy wars. Everybody takes sides. It gets kind of infected with all of the poison and heat of American political life. And in a sense, it's almost not even about the women anymore.
Can we talk about the enablers? You explain, you document in great detail in this thing, why he got away with being a serial predator for so many years. And in part, let's start with he got away with little help from his friends, famous friends. Lisa Bloom, victim's advocate. David Boies, he of same-sex marriage and Gore defense. And Linda Fairstein, famous sex crimes prosecutor. Let's start with Lisa Bloom. Most people know her as a victim's advocate, obviously the daughter of the legendary Gloria Allred, who's also in the book. Explain Lisa Bloom's role in this whole thing, Megan.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Lisa Bloom is probably one of the most visible victims' rights advocates in the country. And in 2016, she crossed sides to work for Harvey Weinstein. Now, she said she did that because she thought he had only engaged in inappropriate comments towards women and she wanted to help him apologize. But in the course of reporting this book, we obtained these confidential records, her billing records, a memo that she wrote to Weinstein, basically a job audition, in which it was clear that she had much deeper knowledge of the serious allegations and that she was prepared to play a much darker role.
Was it $8.95 an hour? Is that what I remember? Is that her from the book?
She was, yeah.
Mere $8.95 an hour?
She was paid a $50,000 retainer fee and it basically was working at a rate of $8.95 an hour, saying that she would basically use all these underhanded tactics to help him undermine his accusers.
How about David Boies?
What's fascinating about David Boies is the duration of his representation of Weinstein. It was about 15 years during which he helped conceal and spin and pay hush money to women. He was always by Weinstein's side, ready to kind of silence these accusations, including the one about Rowena Chiu, who wrote that powerful essay yesterday in the New York Times. And part of what was interesting about the contrast between these two figures is that Lisa Bloom has apologized for her work with Weinstein. David Boies actually told us that he has no regrets about his representation of Weinstein.
Can we do one more, Linda Fairstein? I mean, obviously, she came down a notch, to say the least, after the Anna DuVernay thing about the Central Park situation. But she was involved, including in the case that was the first that most of us heard about Weinstein. What was her name? Was it Ambra Battalana? The woman who had the audio tape, thanks to help from the New York Police Department, of Weinstein essentially acknowledging, it seemed to me, that he had groped her. What was Fairstein's role in this?
Well, so she had basically helped Weinstein make connections at the federal prosecutor's office where she had once worked in 2015. And not only that, but in 2017, when we were in the process of reporting this story and trying to uncover the truth, she was among the people who showed up with Weinstein at the New York Times, barged into the New York Times in the 11th hour trying to stop our story. Now, that's one of the many scenes that had played out in the course of our investigation behind the scenes. It was off the record. And in the reporting of this book, we worked to bring so many of these behind-the-scenes stories into the light so that readers can be with us in that moment where we're like, Linda Fairstein, this famous sex crimes prosecutor, is here by Harvey Weinstein's side, defending him in the 11th hour.
So when they leave, do you two turn to each other and go, Linda Fairstein is David Boies? There had to be those moments, yes?
Absolutely, because with Linda Fairstein, I mean, we had grown up thinking of her as the most famous sex crimes prosecutor there was. But I think that in this reporting, and especially in this book, because we learned so much later, that whole question of who helped and who hindered is so surprising. If you would have told us several years ago that Gwyneth Paltrow would have been one of our secret sources, we would have been very surprised. And there's a kind of deep throat of the Weinstein investigation we write about in this book.
The accountant.
The accountant of 30 years, an unassuming man, not a woman, a man, named Erwin Rydar.
No, but that's the good news part of the story. I said to you just as we were sitting down, I remember a piece you wrote 2 or 3 weeks after the original story broke on October 5th of 2017, where you're interviewing Quentin Tarantino, who obviously did a ton of films with Harvey Weinstein, where he says, I'll never forget this line, I knew enough to have done more than I did. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people that knew enough to do more than they did. And I understand when vulnerable people don't have the courage or decency to speak up. How do you explain the powerful people that didn't?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the questions that we had walking away when we first broke the story was Bob Weinstein. This was Harvey Weinstein's brother, his longtime business partner. They ran 2 companies together over the time that Weinstein was engaged in this alleged predatory behavior. What did he know? When did he know it? And what did he try to do about it? And for the first time, he sat down and gave us a whole series of interviews for this book.
Well, including this letter that he wrote to his brother. We have a piece of it, a little tiny piece of this incredible letter, all of which is here. Just the piece we have. This is to his brother Harvey. You brought shame to the family and your company through your misbehavior. Your reaction was once more to blame the victims or to minimize misbehaving in various ways. If you think nothing is wrong with your behavior, then announce it to your wife and family.
And that was in 2015, 2 years before the truth spilled into the public view.
And was that because Harvey punched him in the mouth, or punched him in the nose, or was there something else that did it? What was the tipping point for him?
Well, you're right that Bob had in fact also been a victim of Harvey. He had been assaulted by him in front of other executives in the company. Nobody reported it to the police. Nobody tried to hold him accountable. But he acknowledges that he was aware of these allegations of sexual misconduct against his brother going back years. And in fact, in 2 cases, he helped provide the money to silence victims who came forward.
Let's move ahead for a second. The reason I said 2.0 in the beginning, particularly for you at home, is because obviously Tarana Burke started this whole thing more than a decade ago. But to say you guys recharged it is an understatement of the women who had the courage and the few men to come with you. Lisa Banks and Deborah Katz were here on Thursday, and I cited some polling. I'm a cup totally empty kind of guy, not half empty. And I'm citing, you saw this Harvard Business Review thing where on Me Too backlash, 21% are reluctant to hire women for jobs involving close interpersonal interactions. 27% avoid one-on-one meetings with female colleagues, sort of the Pence rule kind of thing. So I asked them, had they really made progress? Both said yes. Here's Lisa Banks.
Certainly this backlash is the next step that we have to combat. But society has changed fundamentally. In the last 2 years since the advent of Me Too, society has moved forward in a way that it hasn't moved forward previously.
Has it?
Part of what's so confounding is that everything has changed and nothing has changed.
What do you mean by that?
There are 3 questions we think still need to be resolved about Me Too. Number 1, what kind of behavior is under scrutiny? Is it just classic sexual assault, sexual harassment, or is it also inappropriate comments, verbal abuse? How far back are we going in time?
That was the question raised by Matt Damon, and he got eviscerated for having raised that question. Maybe too soon was the reason, yes?
Yes. Question number 2. How do we evaluate what happened? What are the tools we use to figure out the real facts? Question number 3, what does accountability look like? It's easy to say there should be accountability. To assign it is much harder. And then what happens is these questions get mixed up. Like with Senator Al Franken, people were debating whether or not he should have left that Senate seat before there was really clarity about what the facts were of what he had and hadn't done.
Are you ready to answer any of the questions, or you just posing them? I can pose them, too. Can you answer them?
Well, we're certainly prepared to grapple with them. You know, we don't stop with the breaking of the Harvey Weinstein story. We push into the year that followed as
with
things
Blasey
became
Ford.
as things became more complicated, and as Blasey Ford testified and became one of the most controversial figures.
Speaking of Blasey Ford, not only am I jealous of your work, I am so jealous of The Gathering. Is that the title of your last chapter?
Yeah.
So you convene a meeting in Gwyneth Paltrow's house that has Ashley Judd, Gwyneth Paltrow, a worker who had the courage to come forward from McDonald's, Rachel Crooks, who accused Donald. I mean, a whole spectrum of women, all of whom, with one exception, Rowena Chiu, who ultimately, because of this meeting, didn't come. Why did you convene these? Was it 12 women? Is that what it was?
We wanted to do a group interview, not a therapy session, not a not a kind of private gathering, to say, okay, what happens after you come forward? All of you have stood on the diving board, except for Rowena. All of you have taken the plunge. What have you actually found on the other side? And part of what was fascinating was watching them start to coach one another. Like Christine Blasey Ford, this was just really a few months after her testimony. She started to talk about how she was struggling with stuff that was written about her on the internet that wasn't true. And Ashley Judd and Gwyneth Paltrow dove in and kind of became her coaches. They said, we're experts in living under the glare of public scrutiny, and we have to tell you, do not read the comment section of what is written about you on the internet.
And by the way, and Chiu, if I hadn't made it clear, came forward in part because all the women, Blasey Ford in particular, ultimately decided it was her time too.
That's right. I think that there's the country at large is sort of debating the significance of Christine Blasey Ford coming forward and what happened a year ago. What we can tell you is that for one particular woman, Rowena Chiu, it was extremely significant to her personally, that this was after watching all these various other women come forward with allegations against Weinstein. It was really watching Christine come forward that gave her the courage to make the leap.
One last thing, we only have a minute left. I know I'm the 4,000th interview to say this to you, but this is sort of like All the President's Men and Spotlight Redux in 2019. It is such a brilliant tribute to journalism at its best. And I know you won't praise yourself, so I won't do this. But I assume that was part of the motivation. In the face of fake news, enemy of the people. Was that not part of why you decided to do this thing?
We want people to believe that facts can actually drive social change, and that stories, when they're told bravely and accurately, can really cause compassion and action.
Okay, before we go, you have 30 seconds to tell the world. Who's Rebecca Corbett? I love the story.
Oh, my goodness. Rebecca Corbett, our editor, she was really, sometimes people say that there were 2 women who broke the Weinstein story. There were 3. And Rebecca was by our side every single way, making sure that this happened.
October 5th, you hit publish. What did she do on the night of October 4th?
I mean,
she stayed up all night.
She stayed all night.
All night.
You go home to Brooklyn, she stays up all night.
That's
I love that story. I love the book. It is so powerful and great. Megan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much, Jodi.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. The book again is She Said, Breaking the Sexual Harassment Story That Helped Ignite a Movement.